Welcome everyone to the last session of our Thursday colloques for this semester. We will start up again next semester early on with a large number of job talks for our the new faculty positions for which we're searching. So you should keep your eyes open for announcements about them as they are arranged. I should note that we might have a few of those on Tuesdays rather than Thursdays, because we'll be having series of talks put together in rapid succession. So we'll have quite a feast of delicious talks early on in the semester. But today we are gathered here to hear a presentation by one of our advanced PhD students, Matteo Fiorini. I think pretty much everybody will know him in one way or another, since he's a constant presence, a constant illuminating presence in our community. Matteo joined us a couple of years ago after a degree at the University of Venice, Ca' Foscari, right? Where he started his work on the kinds of topics that we're going to hear about today on focus structures. But there, I think you just did that. Right? Yeah. But today, we're going to be listening to him entertain us with more data and analysis from his own home language of Camuno. So join me in welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. Just realized I forgot to take a sip of water before starting, so I'm going to do that. So yeah, thank you for being here or on Zoom last week of classes. I really appreciate that. And before actually starting, I would like to thank Ed for asking me to give this talk and to start with a little disclaimer to some extent. It took me a while to decide what to talk about because the research that I'm presenting today is the topic of my dissertation. And so essentially I had a million things that I would like to talk about because of course it's a topic that I'm passionate about, but somehow I had to narrow it down. And so the path that I decided to take is to kind of show what I have so far and what possibilities are open in front of me. So I'm not going to give completely definitive answers to the questions that I'm raising, because some of them need to be pushed for when I'm ready to take a decision that is basically based on theoretical preference. And so I don't want to commit on that before having all the possible data that I can imagine. So I can now start. And today we are talking about focusing Camuno. So I think that it's fair to start by asking why focusing on focus. So the idea is that focus is a highly debated topic in the literature, at once discussed and debated. And so it's relevant to the field and is also very exciting to work with because you keep having kind of contrastive ideas about how to approach the topic. It's rich in variation, macro variation, micro variation, optional variation. That means that cross-linguistically within a specific speaking community and within the same grammatical system, you have variation in the ways focus is marked. And since essentially it touches upon all modules of grammar and extra-linguistic context and whatnot, there are a lot of theoretical implications in studying focus. And I think that any subfield of linguistics would have something to say about focalization. And the second question in our presentation about focus in Camuno is, of course, why Camuno? So Camuno is an endangered Gallo-Italic language that is spoken in Valle Camonica. which is in the northeast of Lombardia, which is the region where Milan is, if you're familiar with Italy somehow. That is right in the middle of the Alpine area of Italy. And it's a very interesting position with a very interesting history, because in the north, we have languages like Retro-Romance, languages spoken in Switzerland or in other Alpine Valley of Italy. In this part of the region, we have the German minority speakers, speaking community in Italy. We have all the dialects all over the place, of course, and historically, just to mention the last 500 years, it was under Milan domination, then Venice domination, then Milan, then the French, then the Austrian, then Italy. And so this makes for a very interesting and unpredictable sometimes typology. This connected to the fact that essentially I remember when we had to, it took 2 hours to do, to go to a town that now it's 30 minutes away. So it's been isolated for a long time. So it's quite interesting. So we have this heterogeneous typological profile. There is rich microvariation for all these factors. And it's an endangered language, which is, I think, always valuable to study. And it's also my endangered language, so that's why I'm passionate about it. And we don't have really a number of speakers, but this is a language that doesn't have a writing system. And we have, of course, immigration, both internal and external. So since the valley has 100,000 inhabitants, I would assume that at least as heritage speaker, okay, so now we can actually move to what I'm actually going to talk about. So I will be introducing some theoretical preliminaries and relevant patterns before giving a very quick overview of some ideas that we have in the literature. And then I will focus in seeing how these possibilities are adopted or adapted to account for the data that I've collected. And as usual, at the end, we have a conclusion. So let's start with preliminaries. And the first thing that I would like to do is trying to define focus. So in the generative tradition, the first person that actually systematically investigate the topic of focus is Jack and Dolph, who essentially noticed pair like one of the three men, John, most. Now, what is noted here is that we have one single portion of this utterance that refer to a group of men, but really we are referring to two different sets of entities. And so based on this very basic observation, Jack and Dolph observed and proposed that focus introduces an existential presupposition. In other words, we can either have, when we pronounce a sentence like John hates Bill the most, we can either have hated by John or someone that hates Bill. And so in a slightly more systematic way, a proposition like John hates Bill suggests the presence, the implicit presence of a question like who does John hate, that can be formalized like this, essentially. And the same thing is valid for the subject. And this idea of connection with set of reference became known as referring to sets of alternatives. And specifically, Matt Roth proposed this very successful semantic framework of alternative semantics that deal with all these operation and constraints that operate on sets of alternatives. And so the idea is that we have a whole lot of grammatical operation that need alternative to be active in the context for some reason. And with this alternative, we can create the meaning of whatever structure. So in the case of focus, what we're doing here is that we have a set of alternative present in the context that is activated by this implicit question, and focus will operate to that set by constraining it and limit it to the contextually appropriate alternatives. And the main information that we need essentially here is to understand alternative semantics as proposing that every object has two semantic values, one that is an ordinary semantic value and another that is a focus semantic value. And the distinction is between a proposition whose meaning is simply the ordinary semantic values or focus semantic values. So the semantic of a proposition is part of this set of alternative propositions. So we have John smokes. It can mean just John smokes, or also that John smokes and a number of other entities could be smoking. So a very superficial, to some extent, definition of focus based on what we said. We could just think of focus as the portion of string introducing new information, that is the part inquired by that implicit question, and it refers to subsets of the possible alternative propositions active in the octoround's context and contextually defined. And so how is focus expressed in Camuno? This is the canonical ordering on Camuno, that is SVO for the majority of the structures and VS for an accusative. This is an interesting pattern, but it's not a new pattern because it's possibly the majority of Romance languages behave this way. What changes in Camuno is that, for instance, we have WH that appear close internally. And so I marked in this case, I marked with italics the verb and with bold the WH question, which is close internally, and maybe unsurprisingly, the answer to this question, which is the focus, appear in the same exact position. This pattern has been observed in some language from very distant families to Camuno, but also in some Romance languages. And the really distinction between Camuno and these other languages is that Camuno never accepts focalization in situ. In situ means essentially that we have the same order in the canonical out of the blue pronunciation utterance and in the focus. So in English, for instance, I could say her husband made the soup, something like that. So I don't need to move that constituent. So what the literature says about focus is essentially that there are some languages that mark focus in a specific position. And in that sense, this is something that is common to Camuno as well. And so in this example, I have Basque, Camuno, and Hungarian. Basque in 9a and Hungarian in 9c have the object focalized and appear in pre-verbal position. While in Camuno, it appeared in post-verbal position. That is the pattern that we were talking before. So from now on, I stopped marking the verb. This was kind of to make it a bit more clear. I will be marking focus with capital letter, kind of the standard. So that's what you're gonna see. So based on the observation that we need to focus to appear in a specific position, some scholar proposed that focus is indeed marked structurally. And so that there is, since there is a linear position for focus, there must be a relatively structural position that holds focus. And for instance, Horvath proposed that focus can, in certain language, be marked under government and adjacency. But the real important thing cross-linguistically here is that the idea that focus is a syntactic feature that is inherent to the verb, and this feature can be assigned to other categories via a specific structural relationship. And again, this is not obligatory. It could be via other means, but this has been developed for Hungarian, but it can be applied for a lot of other languages. And nobody more than the cartographic framework in syntax really adopted this idea and expanded and amplified this idea by proposing that indeed focus is a head, and this head is project a focus phrase that is part of the left periphery of the clause, which is this expanded version of the CP hosting a number of functional projections. So that's how it looks like. So the idea here is that we have a number of features in the head of this projections. We have features that correspond to that label, and whatever move in their specifier will be interpreted in light of what's in the head. And so we have this strict relationship between specifier and head in terms of interpretation. And I just wanted to notice that the asterisk before the topic phrase doesn't mean ungrammatical in this representation, but it means that we can have as many topics as we want, but only one focus. And of course, the focus projection is the only thing that we're going to discuss today about this. So how can a derivation proceed in this system? Let's observe cases like 10 in which the canonical order of Italian SVO can be altered for pragmatic reasons. And so in this case, instead of having ho letto il tuo libro, we have il tuo libro ho letto, meaning that I read your book and not someone else's. And the way this structure is derivated is that an XP move so that can be interpreted as focus. And so what happened is simply that whatever is carrying the feature for focus move to the specifier of focus, and there can be interpreted. And we have the order that we needed. There are some issues with this, or at least some open questions with this. And of course, we can't really talk about everything right now, so I'm happy to talk a bit more in detail later. But the important thing here is that a lot of people are not convinced that focus is a syntactic, or at least purely syntactic phenomena. And so a lot of folks try to find an explanation in phonology. And this stems from quite old observation that focus align with the main stress in the clause. And here stress is a kind of a complicated terms because we are talking about, in general, prosodic prominence that can be realized through a variety of means. And so the idea is that focus can and actually is marked at the phonological level rather than in syntax. And so it would be what we are more likely to see in English. So some languages allow the stress to move to mark focus. Again, this is exactly what happened in English. But in other cases, as we've seen, we clearly can tell that movement is happening, or at least we need an explanation for some dislocation that seems to happen. And so how can we account this when it's phonology that is responsible for marking focus? One idea comes from Zubizarreta. I'm not talking about her account for Spanish. The idea is that something will move to a position where stress can be assigned. But the really important notion here is that syntactic movement may be motivated by phonological restriction when it comes to pragmatic phenomena. And an interesting analysis that I like to share with you has to do with Basque. So there's been a lot of work in figuring out the way in which stress is assigned to a specific node. And people propose a nuclear stress rule that is a specific rule that assigns the main stress in a sentence to a very specific position. And in Basque, this is the most embedded branching node in the structure. And the proposal that I would like to share with you is by Arregui, who proposes that in order for focalize or target of focalization to be in the position where focus is assigned, everything that is not in focus will evacuate the focus domain. And so we have Basque's head final. So we have a structure that has essentially subject, object, and verbal complex, and we want to focalize the subject. The way in which this is achieved is not by moving the subject, but actually by moving the object. So what happened is that the object that is supposed to be, that is not in focus, will move out of the focus domain so that that can leave the subject behind. And after this movement that is independently motivated from focus, Yonek, the subject, will actually be in the position where focus is assigned. And so one of the interesting predictions that this system makes is that we don't need movement if the object is on focus, because the object is always in the most embedded position in the closure. And so something happened to a tree that was there in which the object don't move. Oh no, okay, there it is. No, okay, there it is. So the object here it's already in a position where stress is assigned, so we don't need any movement. And from a minimalist perspective, the less movement, the better, usually. So this is a possible advantage of this kind of ideas. So how can we kind of see how all these ideas can be applied to Camuno? Once again, this is the pattern structure. Marina saw the play with Franca, and this is going to be the example all over the place, so try to memorize those words. And this is the focus pattern. And so after the verb, you always have, in this case, I'm focalizing in 14a, the adjunct with Franca, that lost piece of the name for making staying on one single line. And in 14b, I'm focalizing the subject, and so Marina. And so essentially, remember that no matter what is the initial function, the canonical function and position of a constituent, it will be appearing after the verb in this position. There are some exceptions, but we can stop here for now. And once again, in situ focus is anglomatic, which it's quite interesting compared to other Romance languages. So let's just try what has been tried to account for Camuno. And the very first possibility, followed by the majority of people working on Italian dialects, is to adopt Ritz's derivation, that is movement to the focus position in the left periphery. And so we already see how this movement would occur. The focus constituent move to the specifier of focus where the feature can be checked. Where does the verb go? Because in having this requirement, we need a position for the verb. And above focus P, we have a topic position. So maybe it's a topic, but why topicalize a verb? And how topicalize a verb? And why topicalize only the verb? So there's a bunch of questions that one would need to answer. And it would be random movement in which the object leave the VP and then the VP move to above the focus position. So the order is actually present, but for the moment, I have not real evidence for this to happen. And we need to assume a bunch of things for make it work. So maybe there is a better explanation. So maybe we want to make use of a relation, which is not in C, but is in T. And so we can imagine that focus move lower. So, I was saying that whatever is focalized move to this focus position in the same way that we've seen to the specifier, but the focus position is the focus projection is lower. And again, this has been proposed and applied for some languages that are close to Camuno. First of all, Italian, in ways that don't really convince me, but also for varieties that could be that are cognate of Camuno, or they just behave very similarly. And so this is the case on the border with France. And this is kind of sound like a nice possibility because we move the focus and the verb move to T and create this complex head that give us the right pattern. So it's kind of a possible to apply analysis. However, Camuno is quite when it comes to the distribution of a lot of things. So in this case, we have an adverb like always, and you can see that can appear between an auxiliary and a participle. It can appear after the participle, but before a verbal particle that is connected to that specific lexical verb, and it can appear after the entire particle, participle plus particle complex. And the same thing can be said for negation. Negation can appear all over the place as well. And this is not necessarily a problem if we adopt a cartographic framework, for instance, in which the verb move fairly easily, but you do need a bunch of assumptions so that this kind of pattern can be explained. So I would say that this is better than the focalization in the left periphery, but definitely not optimal. And so maybe the prosody-driven movement can help. And here immediately we have a problem. I have no idea what kind of nuclear stress rule, if any, assigned main stress to Camuno, because according to the majority of nuclear stress rule, we would expect the stress to be on this lower DP, the show. But that's only a secondary stress. The main stress is always on and sentence final. So maybe in Camuno, we just have a bunch of reasons for which the stress is assigned linearly or limited in other way. And so the idea here is, why would we ever move? We would expect that every time that something is in sentence final position, we would not have any issue with our focus interpretation in situ. And that's, as we said, is not the case. So since we're not super happy with what we have, let's try to see what other possibility can be. And let's look at some more data. And this data involve focus associate particles. And these are particles that correspond to the English even or only. And if you think about, for instance, even, when we were talking about operating on certain alternatives, what even does is taking all these possible alternative active in the context, rank them, choose the less likely to be true, but true indeed, and spell it out. So that's kind of a complicated thing to say, but if you say even Matteo could give that talk, you are implying that I was absolutely not able to. I shouldn't, at least. And in Camuno, we also have which is a particle in 18b that could be thought as the opposite of even, because it takes all the alternatives, rank them. The most likely to be true is indeed true. And this was the topic of my qualifying exam. And in the end, the best translation would be da for English. And only it's another particle that select essentially the only one true. The important thing to remember is that these associate with focus, meaning that they are not specifically focus themselves, but they require focus because all of has this presupposition for the existence of at least one other alternative. I would never say I only drink milk if there's no possibility to be drinking something else as well. And interestingly, the particle in Camuno can associate with the element in postverbal position. And so in this case, we have focus associate particle, participle, and focus. But differently from English, we cannot have long distance association. And so in English, I could say something like, they even saw Mario at mass. And the at mass is the part that is surprising. In Camuno, you cannot do that. So once again, focus in situ seems not possible, and strongly prefer the focus after the verb. And so what I start thinking is that maybe there is something special about this position, but also there might be something special also with this position. And maybe that can offer a possible help to diagnose new analysis. And the first possible analysis that we can think of is having two focus positions. And so we have essentially movements that are very common cross-linguistically, and better analysis that have been applied cross-linguistically quite successfully. And we have movement of the XP to the specifier of focus phrase. Now it's the third time that I mention it, to have that reading. And if we, since we have another focus phrase, we can just move the participle to the head of that focus phrase. So two movements that are already possible in the literature. And another proposal that we can think of is, I call it phase-based derivation, because relies on the concept of phase, which is one of those theoretical assumptions that we have to make, but at the same time, quite commonly accepted. And so the idea is that operations, syntactic operation, only occur in a specific domain, and that domain is defined by the presence of this head that constitute the phases. So a barrier that cannot be passed. Of course, this is more complicated than that. And so in this case, what happened is that the reason for the focus to move is that we want to escape a phase so that we can enter the scope of an operator. So an operator essentially is something that binds a variable so that whatever interpretation that operator is related to can be passed down essentially to the variable. And so the idea is that since we just want to escape the phase to be visible from a operator in the focus phrase, we adjoin to VP so that we can, as soon as possible, enter the higher phase domain. And I keep forgetting that I did spell out what happened, so this is what I just said. And the advantage of this is that we have analysis, again, with a focus phrase, so something that has been proposed, but at the same time, in a new way. And I think that it's a good idea because we don't have this specifier head agreement that seems to be fundamental for many accounts, but there's maybe some in the phase of domain. Of course, both proposals have some issues. First, why would the lexical verb move? This would give a prediction for a strict relationship between verb and focus. And maybe we don't want that because there's stuff that can appear in between. And for the two focus position, why would not be the verb moving to the low focus position? And how can we explain those order variation that we said earlier for the adverb and the negation? I said that in a cartographic approach, we can kind of solve them very easily by making an assumption regarding movement, but we are still to some extent making an assumption by saying that they are just adjuncts. So this is the kind of things that I was saying at the beginning, that at some point we have to commit based on what framework you think it's better, works better. And once again, if we assume that spec head relationship, we need to explain why, essentially, and not something that is more possibly applicable to other phenomena. And in general, the presence of two focus phrase, one on top of the other, I don't know of Romance languages that do that. The idea of two focus position is actually a nice one because we have some extra data that has to do with contrast, with topicalization in this case, that may need accommodation with two focus phrases, but we do need some adjustment and some more data to kind of maintain that. So albeit no decision has been made, that has been took down a bit. And so I move it to on Zoom. I'm sorry, I keep disconnected from the meeting. Oh, it says that I'm not. Can you guys hear me over Zoom? let's try again. Okay. Some more evidence for, first of all, this position and where it is in the clause structure. So, all right. So in 20, and that help us having a diagnosis, linearly speaking, because we know that the model will be in T, and so the idea is that this focus associate particle can never appear above T, can appear under T. And what about negation, adverb, and verbal particles? So those asymmetries in distribution. This is not easy to be solved, and so it's not going to be solved at the end of this slide. But I think that a good idea is to find evidence for showing that Camuno, in Camuno, the lexical verb, that is the past participle, moves out of the VP independently for some other reason. This is not an uncommon proposal for Romance languages. It's not clear where, but I would say that most accounts say that the participle will leave the big VP. And so if we move it independently, we have at least a theoretical trick that we can use, that the participle will be in the same domain as whatever is weirdly ordered, and so we can have scrambling for pragmatic reasons, since that's why we have this alternance in ordering. Or there might be some constraint on PF that limit the part of the copy that is pronounced after movement. So a bit technical here, but these are just possible theoretical tools that we can have to explain something in a bit more, a bit less game-changing way, let's say that. Something that is very interesting also is that we have this weird pattern in which we cannot have negative focus. And so when we have a structure like 21A, the Angela doesn't eat meat on Friday. The idea is that we can have just one interpretation, that is, it is not on Friday that Angela eats meat, and this could the interpretation in 21B is a falsum focus. That is not really answering the question that we would expect based on the properties that we said at the beginning. That is, Angela doesn't eat meat on a certain day. We want an interpretation like, I'm sorry, guys, on Zoom. I feel that it's telling me that the connection is good, so I would expect it to be good. Let's hope for the best. So the reading that we really would want based on the properties of focus would be, it is on Friday that Angela doesn't eat meat, right? As opposed as it is on Tuesday that Angela doesn't eat. And this is a pattern that we see also in WH phrases. We cannot accept negative WH phrases with the WH in the position in which the focus is in the close internal. And the only way in which we can do these kind of things is to have both WH and focus in a cleft, or possibly front of WH, but it's kind of very, very weird. And so once again, this is not a complete solution, but if we take neg P to essentially be under the focus position where the operator is, the negative operator would block the focus operator to scope on the focalized XP. And so that could be a possible possibility. So some what I call conclusions, but actually are kind of entering conclusions and still open questions. I think that I'm fairly confident in saying that the current accounts are not appropriate as is to capture all the data for Camuno, or at least we can do better. And locality constraint seems to be crucial, which is not a new idea, but maybe the idea of localities for focus constituent to be close enough with licensor, and that can happen in many ways. And this is, do we need a spec head relationships? And so once again, we know that there are a bunch of syntactic relationships that can exist. Some of them apply to a large number of data, and some of them needs to be are a bit more specific to specific operations. And so if we can decide that C command, for instance, can account for the data that so far has been accounted for, we specify ahead, it could be a good idea, theoretically. Focus associated particle may be useful to actually investigate the properties of focus, derivation, and distribution. There has been some work on this recently, and I kind of like this idea because in those languages that don't have a focus marker, it gives you at least some way to look into the phenomena in a way that you can actually see and hear. And in general, by thinking about this kind of stuff, I've been more and more convinced that there is such a huge variation cross-linguistically that we really want to find flexible accounts and possibly a system of optimal solution. And so we really want to allow for a variety of operation. I really don't think that we can find one way to derive focus, and that's going to be the solution for everything. And I think coming right on time. Thank you. So yeah, it's my understanding that I'm going to chair myself. So if someone has question on Zoom, you can either speak up or writing in the chat. And of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. So the question was about essentially the methodology and the type of data that we collected and how. I just said we instead of I. So I used a variety of methodologies. The bulk of the data has been collected with a combination between elicitation tasks and grammaticality judgment created based on those elicitation tasks, essentially. But sometimes that is was not possible because the speakers of Camuno are, for the vast majority, elderly. And so sometimes they just get bored after 5 seconds that they want to talk about the war. And so you let them talk about whatever they want, and that's where you find interesting patterns that then you can ask for maybe the younger speakers or themselves. In a previous work, we tricked them. And I'm saying we because that was a collaborative work in this case. We tricked them as in we ask someone to help us draft the questionnaire for someone else. And so they were kind of forcing themselves to speak the most Camuno that they could. One of the main issues are, the main issues are related to really the data collection in dialectology, that it's very problematic, as Ed knows very well in Italy specifically. Because people, and when I try to give myself judgments that I try to ignore sometimes, people tend to either over-accept or under-accept for a lot of social reasons, for instance. Me being a speaker helps a lot. I'm ready to bet that Ed had to work a lot for having kind of a connection, and you're not going there to, study the frozen caveman. And so it does have a bunch of issues. And so yeah, I try to go around those by having more than one session with speakers, for instance, so that I can kind of understand my goal. And I was stressing the fact that this can be used to maintain the language. And usually speakers of Italian dialects are very proud of being speakers. So you just need to poke in the right way. It was kind of all over the place, but it's that satisfactory answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's absolutely one of the problem, and that's when that confidence kind of and trust come into play, because you have speakers that will tend to, the older the speaker, the more they will tend to speak to you in Italian. And for instance, like the difference is astonishing when I ask for focus fronting, which is common in Romance languages, as we see for Italian. And when I ask focus fronting at the first meeting, a lot of people would accept it. But then that would never be produced in the experiments. And so I re-ask judgments on that focus fronting, and people would start accepting it with a but, telling me that, oh, but I would think that you're from the South. And that's exactly my impression. Before diving into this, every time that I would read briefly, I would not agree with the data, because for me it was like, that's not Italian, that's Southern Italian. And that I realized that no, mine wasn't Italian. It was strongly affected too. Yeah, South essentially it's everywhere. Yeah, everything Southern normally. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, actually it is accepted in Bergamasco, that's right. Across a little pass. Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned not like specific evidence, but what was that?
So usually the kind of things that we can think about is possibly agreement patterns. In a lot of actual Southern Italian varieties, there are some interesting alternatives between agreeing with the subject or with the object. And so one possibility would be that depending on the phase in which the object is, will be pronounced or not. And I'm talking, sorry, about morphological agreement, so for gender in this case. Sometimes we can have, actually very frequently, we have dislocation of object clitic. And in that case, you need morphological marking of the participle so that it agrees with the object rather than the subject. And so looking into that thing, Camuno may do something that I'm not sure what it is, that look like differential object marking. And this is a phenomenon that you see in Southern Italian varieties. It's always difficult to say, because sometimes you say, oh, this thing happened in Southern Italian varieties, but then you realize that there are a whole lot of varieties that are not studied. So maybe it happened, but we don't know yet. And differential object marking essentially means that sometimes for certain language put a preposition before a direct object. So I watch to the movie, something like that, which is very common in the South, in the Italian spoken in the South, not really in the North, but it looks like there might be a morpheme clitic that does that. So yeah, I don't know now, but definitely the first thing would be agreement pattern and possible alternatives like presence or absence of a preposition, because at that point you could think of where this kind of relationship can be established. And yes, I'm sorry for people on Zoom, I forgot to repeat the question. I'm going to answer Kelly's question. Beyond documentation, do you have plans to help with Camuno revitalization? That's a good question, and I don't really have answer for it necessarily, because I would love to, but at some point someone has to start. And this, for some reason, language, maintaining the language identity in Italy, for some reason went exactly the opposite that it went in Spain. And so it's a far right operation rather than a far left operation. And this, there is a discrepancy of the actual speaker and the university, for instance, in the interest of this. And plus, there is a lot of effort of revitalization that completely ignore actual linguistics analysis, because we have the Lega, we have a party that would like to have the north of the country to be independent. And so they decided to put dialects all over the place on science and stuff like that, making up a completely a writing system that has no reason to exist. As you've seen, I mix Italian writing system, and here it's just because I needed that phonetic symbol, but otherwise we don't like we should need resources and time to develop that as a start. So I really would like to do something for revitalization, but I'm not sure what that may look like, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
You say Camuno doesn't have a writing system.
Mm-hmm.
So what writing system do you use?
I still have to decide. I think that I will go with a mix of IPA symbols and Italian Latin alphabet. Essentially, if an English speaker would be confused, I will put a phonetic symbol. So in this case, in Italian, I would have a FCE, and I'm not sure if people would read it, sure. And so I think that I'm going to be a combination, because as much as I love to say that my language is super special, it's not that different from Italian to justify an entire different system based on maybe small non-distinctive features in phonetics. But yeah, I think I'm going to go with that. Thank you.
The speakers, Charlie, right?
A lot of them either cannot write or has a writing that stopped at second grade, third grade. So no. Some people tried, but again, political reason came out. Like I met with one of the informant that then I decided that it wasn't a good informant. Try to develop an actual system that mix all features of Lombard, because only united we can beat them. That's just, and so of course that's something that you don't want to have. Like that's so it's very hard, honestly, to see alternatives. And thank you, Max. I keep forgetting to repeat the questions.
So in one of your last slides, you have the negation blocking the focus, or vice versa. I can't remember. You're not sure.
I mean, I don't think that is gonna make a difference. I mean, you're always gonna have an operator in.
That's gonna be general. And sentential negation, it's not over.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Otherwise, or is it just simply the case you can never have negation and have focus?
So,
Sentential negation.
for what I can see, you'd never have sentential negation. But again, that happened with negative interrogative. So maybe it could be just a reflex of the fact that they don't ask, and so they don't answer, basically. So for what I can see, you don't have it, but it's still an if, or a maybe better. Because no, that's what I see, but it's very hard for me to understand. Did they even understand what I'm trying to get at? So maybe more time needs to be used to find a very specific test. Or it is not the case. In most paper that I read, that's the translation. They usually give a sort of more semantic. And so sometimes may be complicated to actually make them understand what you want. And so did I use it as a way to decide which working hypothesis to choose? Yes. Am I ready to commit completely to the fact that this is accurate? I think that a bit of the fact that it's in WA structure, it's very clear that doesn't happen. I feel that kind of gave me a bit more confidence in thinking so maybe. But as you see, there is a couple of question marks because, yeah, I can see a lot of the other reasons for creating this, essentially. Mm-hmm.
But is that like optional? Is that kind of religion where it's like more of like a value theory, like way of like having set structures that get rearranged for different languages, or like is I just that?
Okay. So the question by Lex was essentially to expand on my comment about the need of kind of a flexible approach to the study of focus. And yes, I use optimal to refer to something like optimal. That is finding ways that may help not see focalization as this happened or doesn't happen, but maybe this happened or happened in a different way or happened in a different way. For instance, when it comes to focus assignment, stress assignment, something that we can say, and that's been said for other languages, is that you want focus to be on the right. And usually that means on the right of an intonation of phrase, the entire intonation of phrase. But maybe we prefer to say that maybe it's not that. You want to be on the right of an intonational unit, for instance. And so where would you expect the stress in that case? Where the focus is. And that's actually, I think I have an extra slide on possible prosodic consequences of a phasal derivation if we consider prosody to be mapped cyclically. The stress could be assigned by a cyclic nuclear stress rule that assign it to the place in which we actually see it on focus. And so maybe that says, well, you want to put it on the right of the intonational phrase, but you also want to mark focus, for instance. And so in an OT approach, you would think that in that case, you're going to have mark focus outranking aligned with intonational phrase. And yeah, something like that. And I mean, this is just a very quickly possibility, not but yeah, so optimal, I would say in a sense of flexible, and in terms of micro variation, I feel that your question touched upon that. There's a lot of work on later, micro variation in Romance, because that's kind of what happened. You have these tiny differences in the same system. Yep.
Go back to the definition of focus.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if I learn how to use this. Nope, I didn't. So, getting there? No. Okay, yes. Oh, you took a picture.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, sorry, I was waiting for it.
That's what picture I got.
Good, yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. Yeah. Don't quote this because there's a bunch of things to be added.
Then let's do.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna close now.